The other article that I put out in Jacobin last week was about Texas. It was called Texas Republicans Trample Their Own Principle to Attack Trans Kids. And it was partially inspired by an exchange that I had with Joe Rogan when I was on JRE last week. I think that we have a clip of that if we're going to play that.
There's a lot of decisions that we don't allow people to make until they're of grown age, like tattoos. You can't get your face tattooed when you're 4, but you can when you're 24. You know, it's. I mean, I'm not saying that they're the same thing, but what I am saying is that it's
a hard issue, right?
We're faced with many dilemmas that require discussions and compassionate, comprehensive discussions. And the only way you can do that is without censorship.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, I completely agree on that. I mean, I think that the, youth transition thing, again, I think that this is a little bit of a hard case because I think that on the one hand, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the idea, no sane person thinks that little kids should have complete medical autonomy and just get to do whatever they want. That would be ridiculous. But at the same time, not getting a tattoo when you're a kid isn't gonna have some really bad effect. You can just wait and it's fine, right? Whereas with something like this, if you do have that experience that you feel as if you're trapped in the wrong kind of body, which I'd imagine could be incredibly traumatic if that's not dealt with.
We can only imagine.
Yeah, exactly. I literally don't know, but
right.
It sounds like it.
Neither one of us know.
But I think that then having to go through what from your perspective is the wrong puberty, right? I mean, the stakes are higher than the tattoo thing. And as we were having that conversation in Texas, the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, and the attorney general were acting to legally crack down on any trans kids, not only who, and I think a lot of the people are getting surgical transition at the age of 5 or whatever stuff is right-wing propaganda. It's bullshit, right? But not only surgical transition, but puberty blockers, right? Precisely the thing that the point I was making to Rogan. And, look, I know some people would be happier if I'd gone in that, with both guns blazing and, and sort of done it as an own. But I actually don't think that's the right way to approach these conversations. If you're talking to somebody who is not, is not a raging reactionary, is at least somewhat open to what you're saying, I think that the way you should do it is you should signal that you understand what they're saying, right? You get it, but have you thought about blah, 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 right? It's really not the same as getting a tattoo, that this is a much higher stakes thing. And this is, and the issue, with the Texas thing in particular is not what do you think the clinical standards should be, which I think right after that clip cuts off, I say, look, I don't know. I'm not a medical expert. You're not either, right? What exactly the, standards should be for how much counseling you need, whatever, is best left to medical experts. But whatever you think it should be, this attempted crackdown in Texas, it doesn't matter how much counseling you've gotten, right? And it doesn't just apply to surgical transition. It applies to going on puberty blockers. So if, in other words, the governor and attorney general of Texas do literally want to force kids to go through what would be, I think just a little bit of empathy should show you would be a really horrifying experience. That it would be, I mean, look, if you imagine some sort of science fiction, scenario where against your will, you're going to be physically transformed into the other gender, you wouldn't like that very much. And that's what they're talking about, putting people through. And, the point that I make in the Jacobin piece is that there is an amazing disconnect between the stated principles of Texas Republicans and what they're actually advocating in this case. Right? That these are all people who love to use this libertarian language about, individuals and families should be able to do what they want, and they shouldn't have intrusive government bureaucrats coming down to tell them what to do. But literally, this this order from Governor Abbott and the Attorney General letter talks about prosecuted for child abuse. Not only any parent who allows their child to go on puberty blockers, not only the doctors, but any other licensed professionals, doctors, nurses, teachers who know about it, right? So it's like, okay, on the one hand, if you remember that Charlie Kirk debate last fall, we're talking about people who were a little bit too libertarian to be okay with raising Jeff Bezos' taxes by 1% to pay for housing for homeless veterans, right? They're a little bit too libertarian for that, but they're not quite libertarian enough to be against criminally prosecuting some trans kid's 8th grade math teacher for not ratting them out to the Texas, Department of Family Protective Services, because they went on puberty blockers.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you completely. I mean, I do think the more rhetorically effective way to go would have been to just punch him and then just like run out of the studio and never come back. I think his subscriber would have been like, damn, I was wrong. And now my
But before you run out the door, you got to yell, "You've been owned."
Yeah.
There are so many leftists on Twitter who would have been so happy if I'd done that. But yeah, probably not a rhetorically effective move to make for his audience. I think it's a relatively simple thing. I think the hypocrisy is just astonishing. And I know there are always people who say, oh yeah, but this is the kind of point that's been made about conservative hypocrisy so many times. What's the point? And I would just urge, as I always do, that just because something's old hat to you doesn't mean that's not somebody else's first time hearing it. They're dropping new human beings every day, right? Everybody has a first time when they start to think about this stuff, right? Everybody has their own tipping point. So,
I'd say start your babies on Ben Burgis early as possible, to give them as many arguments as possible.
Yeah.
Absolutely. My children are actually sitting. Oh no, they went to bed.
All right. Well, you got to rouse them from bed and make sure they watch the rest of the show. They don't become Jordan Peterson fans by not inoculating them.
Yes.
Okay. Last Rogan clip I want to play before we bring on Matt and Marianne and Conrad in just a minute is on a somewhat related issue. And I think in some ways, and I wanted to play this because last week, well, if you only watched on YouTube, you didn't see very much of this because Spotify is extremely vigilant about their intellectual property. But if you watch, so the YouTube version ended up getting a lot of this cut out. But if you watched it on the Facebook live stream, or we posted on the Patreon the full video, or if you listen to the podcast version, you heard a lot of the parts of the Rogan interview. We were talking about economics, about Medicare for all, about labor unions, about the post office, postal banking, teachers unions, economic inequality, Mondragon, why it'd be good if we had a society that was dominated not by regular capitalist corporations, but by worker co-ops. But I did just want to play one other not directly economic part of it. I do think that it's, when I say not directly economic, I do think that part of the reason that conservatives have such a hard on for going after public schools is that it's one of the few institutions in our neoliberal hellscape that's A, publicly owned, and B, solidly unionized, at least in a lot of states. So I think there's an economic tie-in. But in any case, let's do the before we go into the Peterson stuff, let's do the CRT clip. I mean, look, this is the same reason I don't like, I don't like the CRT laws either, right? Because I don't like the idea that there are going to be people who are second guessing, what happened in some classroom to say like, was this too close to to one of these ideas that we don't like, right? Did you talk to your students about something that like flew a little bit too close to the sun of CRT, and that makes me.
By CRT, you're talking about critical.
Oh
race
yeah,
theory,
sorry, critical. Sorry, critical race theory. Yeah, and I think that like actual critical race theory, there are parts I agree with, there are parts that I disagree with, but I don't want to live in I want to live in the kind of society where when there's some controversial idea that's out there, like that, like people can talk about it and debate about it, and like if you can like you could discuss it with students in a classroom. Like, I think ideally the way that education should work, it should foster critical thinking. Like, instead of like, this is exactly what you should think.
For sure.
You should be encouraging students to like, to think about it, more clearly, and to argue about it, and to, and to decide what they think, right? Like, ultimately, if you want people to be citizens in a democracy, right, to the extent that we have one of those, like, that's what you want. Like, that's how you want them to grow up, I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. You want discussion.
So I think, and I know James Lindsay's been on the show. I have not watched it, I will admit, because there are only so many minutes and hours in the day. I'm not going to watch 3 hours of James Lindsay if I don't have to. But James Lindsay is one of the intellectual like leading figures of the movement to ban CRT, or ban what they call CRT in public schools. Has been on the Joe Rogan Experience, and again, I don't know if you push back against him in that interview, but I suspect this might have been the first time anybody ever made that case against the CRT laws on the show, and he seemed to agree. Right, I mean, like at the end of the clip, right? He seemed to think so, and maybe, and whatever, maybe he maybe he really didn't, or on later reflection, he didn't. I mean, I have no idea. All I know is what he said in the moment. But I also think whether he did or didn't, I think that just I don't know, having all those billions of people who watch the Joe Rogan Experience like see that case and hear it, and hear Rogan apparently agreed with it. I mean, I think if you're interested in influencing people on this topic, I have a hard time seeing how that could be a bad thing.
Yeah, same. I mean, I still propose we do some kind of substance and do a Patreon episode of Joe and Conceptual James talking to each other. So super chat us if you want to see that. But I would be curious to see. But I'm glad that no matter what happened, that the audience had a corrective, and you presenting it from that angle for sure.
Yeah. Well. All right, so we get up to 1,000 patrons or something. We'll all take mushrooms and watch James Lindsay talk to Joe Rogan for 3 hours for patrons.
The only way to do it.
You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive post-games on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.